Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming. I'm delighted to see the standing room only. It's always nice to have a panel with a full room of excited attendees. My name is Liesl Folks. I'm the Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences here at the University at Buffalo. I want to welcome everybody to our panel discussion, which is being held in conjunction with President Tripathi's Critical Conversations program. This is a new annual presidential initiative, and the objective is to showcase distinguished scholars who are leading the conversation about major societal questions with broad-ranging, cross-disciplinary relevance and impact. We are especially pleased to welcome today Dr. Ed Lazowska as our featured guest in this first year of the program. Dr. Lazowska is the Bill and Melinda Gates Chair of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington and also the founding director of that university's eScience Institute. And feel free to ask him exactly what that means. He is one of the world's leading scholars in the area of high-performance computing and data-intensive discovery, and he's also very active in public policy issues, including his work to promote greater diversity in the STEM fields, and that's what brings us all together today. Diversity in STEM fields is a topic of special significance and relevance to me. I was the first woman to be awarded a PhD in physics at my alma mater for 20 years, which, if you do the math, means that there weren't many people that looked like me in the department at the time. I got noticed along the path and noticed in the hallways a lot, and a great many people reached out to me and helped me along that path, and for those people I'm eternally grateful. It's an abiding mystery to me why so many women are attracted to medicine, for example, but not to the science and engineering professions, when there's so much more creativity in science and engineering professions and much, much better working conditions. That's just one of the many topics I think we could talk about today. I want to reach out a thanks to President Tripathi for his sponsorship of this program, and I want to extend a special welcome to our guests today, who come from other Western New York colleges and universities, as well as our region's pre-K through 12 education community. Working together, we can all help make a difference to this timely and important area of concern, which, as you know, is high on President Obama's agenda as well. Without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists from inside and outside the university. Let me see. Perhaps we'll do them in the order they're seated. Tamara Brown, at the far end of the table, is a leader of community engagement for Praxair and earned her master's degree in chemical engineering here at UB. Where do we go? Amy. Dr. Anne Bazance is the Professor and Chair of Industrial and Systems Engineering and also an alum of UB. And then we go to Sarah. Dr. Sarah Bei Cheng is the Professor of Theatre and Founding Director of TECHNE, Institute for Arts and Emerging Technologies, and they have a big event this coming Friday, which hopefully many of you will be participating in. And there we go to Dr. Lee Melvin, who's our Vice Provost for Enrollment, new to the university and comes to us from Cornell. And then we have our special guest, Ed Lazowska in the middle. And Kerry Price is a PhD student in pharmacology and toxicology. And Joe Gardella, right here on the end, is the John and Frances Larkin Chair of Chemistry here at UB. So, with those introductions done, let me explain the format for this afternoon's session. Each of the panelists I've just introduced will speak for approximately 5 minutes, focusing on an issue in which they have personal experience as it relates to diversity in the STEM fields. Dr. Lazowska may then comment or respond to each speaker, and at the end of that short program, we'll open up to an interactive discussion with the audience and between the panelists about the topic and the topics really that have been introduced. Without further ado, I'm going to begin with Joe Gardella, who's going to speak about his work in encouraging interest in the STEM fields in the K through 12 setting. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Liesl. So I direct a program here that has been developed over the last 9 years, the Interdisciplinary Science and Engineering Partnership with the Buffalo Public Schools. It's grown out of a passion of mine for community engagement and my own experiences as a parent of 2 special needs children in the Buffalo Public Schools. But also grew out of some interest developed in my family as my parents were city school teachers in Detroit, Michigan, with, I think, between them 85 years of teaching experience. many in what euphemistically it would be called high-needs schools. There's all kinds of names for those schools. In 2004, 2005, we started a pilot project to do a different kind of involvement with teachers to increase their professional development and their knowledge, focused on interdisciplinary science and engineering. So the first three words in are interdisciplinary science and engineering. And over time, we've created a pretty diverse partnership that includes corporate partners like Praxair and Life Technologies, university partners, Buffalo State College, and we'll be announcing a few other local universities and colleges that are involved in the next month. The program is achieved a major step forward with funding from the National Science Foundation in 2011 that allowed us to take our pilot project from 2 schools to work in 12 Buffalo public schools. And half of those were focused on middle school grades, elementary and middle school grades, and half of them are high schools. Unlike a lot of projects where there are teacher professional development, we recognized, based on the literature, that in school districts with high needs in terms of low-income students and that doing teacher professional development does not translate into better classroom performance, no matter, depending on how you measure that. But so we recognized that and proposed a program that would provide wraparound academic year support of the teachers. So in the summer, teachers do interdisciplinary research to improve their content knowledge and understanding of the interdisciplinary character of science and engineering. And during the academic year, we provide support for service learning undergraduates and PhD students in the schools to support the implementation. We are, of the National Science Foundation projects in this field, the only project that combines those two pieces into one program. And it's critical in our, for a number of reasons, and I'd just like to say a few words on the things that informed the design of this and where we are. We're in the second year of this 5-year NSF program, expanding it to 12 schools. We're really engaged now in improving the connection between middle schools and high schools. So many of you probably don't know that Buffalo historically desegregated the schools not by forced busing, but by creating magnet schools. So that in Buffalo, there are no traditional regional or local feeder schools. A student, in theory, from any part of the city can apply to go to a high school in any other part of the city if the program that they want is correct. So there's a mixed feeling about that some 30 years later, but one of the reasons we focus in middle school is to create awareness for students in middle school what programs are available in high school, and really help encourage middle school students to choosing high schools for reasons that are clear and related to academics. The other reason we focus on middle school is all the data over the last 30 years that I've read shows that women and underrepresented minorities disproportionately lose interest in science and engineering as a career choice in middle school. There's a lot of other things that go on in an urban school district at the middle school ages, but it's very clear that that's a good place to begin the effort. There's been many, many years of creating exciting hands-on science in elementary schools, and my understanding of the statistics is that American students think science is fun in grades 1 through 4. And they hit middle school and things change. The other thing, several points I'd like to make that have informed us. Here's a statistic I double-checked before I came here. Of the 2,000 PhDs that are granted in the United States, approximately from 1989 through 2005, about 2,000 every year. In 2005, it's jumped to about 2,500. The participation of African Americans, or the percentage of African Americans earning a PhD, was also very flat. I went back as far as I could go. In 1977, 1.7% of PhDs granted in the U.S. went to African Americans. In 2010, that number was 2.3%. So whatever we've been doing for the last 30 years to increase participation is not working. It's not to say that it's not working for the individual students who get support from these programs, but in terms of systemic change, it's not working. And my view is that it's not working because we're identifying high-performing students and giving them extra support without looking to change the dynamic for everyone. So that's what we're trying to do, is change the dynamic for every student in the classroom.
Thank you, Joe. The next speaker will be Kerry Price, who's a PhD student in pharmacology and toxicology. And Kerry, we're asking you to talk about your personal experiences as a student and specifically think about what encouragement and support you've received and how you could have been encouraged or supported more effectively than you have been.
Good afternoon. I'm Kerry, she introduced me, and I'm here to talk about my experience as a student and in the United States because I came here 7 years ago as an international student, and my experiences has been difficult and it's been partially great. So I started community college in Jamaica, and then my mom migrated here and I came with her, and it was very difficult because I was moving from a situation where I was certain I was in school, I was doing well, and I had my dreams and hopes. And when I came here, it was more of an uncertainty because my mom had basically overestimated the cost of an international student going to school here, and so we faced major financial difficulties in the beginning. But nevertheless, that didn't stop me, and I'm here today as a proof. And so when I came here as an international student, I actually came 2 days before school started. And this was because there was an hurricane in Jamaica and there was no planes coming out. And it was very difficult for me to adjust during that first semester because of that, because my first week of school was basically me trying to register for class, trying to get a payment plan in place, and at the same time, we were having financial difficulties because we had totally overestimated the cost. And my first semester was very rough, and it was a new environment for me. It was a new system, and so it took me a while to adjust. My first semester, I had no social life. I just go to class and then I returned home. But during the winter break before the second semester, I decided that I'm going to formulate a recipe for success. I'm going to formulate different ideas how to go about and achieve and overcome my situation. And so I decided that my recipe was going to be, I'm going to network and I'm going to try to join all the clubs and organizations that I can, because not only good grades will get you where you want, you have to also network and participate in different activities to get to know different people. And at the same time, meanwhile, I was creating my recipe, I still needed a job because I still had to help at home the best way I could. And so my second semester, I worked, I joined the track and field team, I joined the soccer team, and I joined I basically put my name up to be a part of the student government. And so I became more involved. At the end of my first year, I ended up meeting my mentor and advisor. His name was Dr. Ketapane. And after trying to get into different labs for different professors, they couldn't allow me in their lab because they couldn't pay me at that time because the grants didn't stipulate that they could pay an international student. So it was difficult for me. I took up a position with my mentor, Dr. Ketapane. It was not paid. I was basically doing it because I wanted to build my resume for the future. And by not getting paid at this moment, but getting experience was really great for me at that time. And so from meeting Dr. Ketapane got me involved in doing research and going to different conferences to do presentations, and that have helped me tremendously. I've had moments where I could not have paid my tuition, and when I went there and speak with my advisor, he basically took the money from his pocket and he gave it to me. So he was a great influence in my life, and he basically, I was on a path, but he basically was like a catalyst for my success, because he gave me necessary resources. He gave me a format to go and present work. And so with that said, Dr. Ketapane was my major support throughout my undergrad education, and it was a major influence in me applying to a PhD program, because I was of the mindset that I just wanted to go to med school, and that was it for me. But when I started doing research, I loved it. And at that moment, I asked a question to myself. I said, what can I do in terms of what field can I go into that will basically help people, and at the same time, I'm doing something that I love. And so I applied, I chose pharmacology at Buffalo, and I chose pharmacology because it allows you to develop medications if you're successful, and it can save a lot of people's life and alleviate a lot of pain. And I know. I'm sorry. And so, like, it was a very difficult journey in terms of financially, but if you, one of the things that I always hold dear to me is, like, if you try and you're not noticed, don't ever give up. Like, just continuously keep trying, because one day you will get recognized.
Very good. Thank you, Kerry. I realise now that I didn't give our illustrious guest an opportunity to respond to the first speaker. Would you like to interject with any comment at this point, Ed?
Maybe just a couple of words about K-12 based on what Joe said. I think the program he's described is important in a set of ways. One is, I think those of us in technical fields has got to take this as our responsibility, rather than saying it's the College of Education's business or something like that, right? It's part of our responsibility, and we have to embrace it. Secondly, you can't do it by just sort of dipping in and then exiting, right? I think the bane of every K-12 teacher is the person full of good intentions who drops in and then disappears. So providing continuity is really important, and the program that he described has that sort of continuity.
Built in, right?
Built in. Finally, the systemic nature, the fact that he's expanded from 2 schools to 12 is really important.
Right.
In some sense, you have to sort of flip districts, and that's critical. I'm a computer scientist, and I want to say a word about computer science in K-12, and I'll say more about this later, but the high order bit is that, in my view, this is a field that provides a set of ways of thinking, modes of thought that are essential to almost any 21st century endeavor. And in 36 of the 50 states, it's not granted academic credit in high school. Okay? That is, it's a shop course. All right? So figuring out what we can do to have computer science and computational thinking as opposed to coding, or even worse, PowerPoint skills or keyboarding skills, actually infused into students in middle school and high school, I think is critically important, because it's something they need to know to be capable students in the 21st century.
Yeah, I
I'll say
agree.
more about that later.
Is there any comment you'd like to make in response to Kerry before we move forward?
It was really moving to me. I have little experience in that arena. I can't imagine the hardships you face coming to a different country and facing the financial
Burden.
difficulties. And the comment you made about networking are critically important. Again, from my field, something we have for women is an annual conference called the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. And what's remarkable about that, when I first went to that many years ago, there were 300 women and probably 10 men. And it was the first time I realized what it's like to go to a conference where it's the reverse, right, typically, right? And the notion of being in a technical setting where you're the majority instead of the minority, and where you have role models of all sorts of different ages is critically important. And as bad as we're doing about gender diversity in computer science, it would be far worse if it weren't for experiences like that
Right.
that show women that they can stand toe to toe and shoulder to
Right.
shoulder, and that there are others like them.
Very good. Thanks, Ed. Lee, can we ask you to make a few comments about attracting students to STEM degree programs and other enrichment experiences to engage with pre-college students?
Sure. And I have 5 minutes, correct?
Yes, yes. You can tell I'm not exactly
Should
being
never
a
ask
taskmaster.
admissions people to speak for just 5 minutes. That's dangerous. First of all, good afternoon to everyone. As I start this presentation, I'd like to stop just for 10 seconds and have you look around the room. Just take a quick look around this room. And first, I want to applaud just the diversity, the rich diversity that I see in this audience. For those of us who've been out of college 10 years or more, do you recall ever having a class with this kind of diversity? Because I think that's important for our students and families to see when we are recruiting them, that they see the diversity on your campus. The first thing many of our students look for is there someone there like me? And regardless of, it could be race, gender, ethnicity, it could also be your sexual orientation, all these pieces that come along, what makes diversity? Someone from out of state, an international student, our students need to see this. I was at a program on Saturday in Chicago presenting to some students there, and one of the parents stood up and asked a question: how would his daughter stand out in the application pool, given that she's a white female with very high test scores going into English? And of course, I asked the question I asked many students. I say, well, who is she? What does she enjoy? What has she been involved in? Who's going to work with her on her essay to make sure that it's appropriate for the college that she's applying to? I understood what he was asking about. He was asking about diversity and how would that impact his child? Would that be a negative or a positive for her? I also recalled being at a college fair where a young Asian woman approached me at my college table with 1500s on the SATs, going into science, and she was an Asian female and wanted to know what could she do to stand out. And with her great test scores, her great GPA, her outstanding curriculum, her community involvement. And I asked her the same question. I said, what do you enjoy doing? I said, because you'll want to share that information with the college admissions evaluators. Who are you? How does all that connect with your life? And after a few conversations with her, I found out that she enjoyed her cultural dancing and sharing that cultural dancing with others. And I asked her to share that with college admissions folks. And the reason I tell you this story is because when we're trying to look at diversity, and particularly when we look into STEM fields, we need students still to tell us who they are and what they enjoy doing and why they enjoy doing those things. We expect about 3.3 million students to graduate from high schools this year. And so we're excited about that. It gives us a great opportunity to bring in a fantastic class for the undergraduate group. And in my role, I also have responsibility for our graduate programs. And we're looking at all types of strategies to reach out to our graduate students to let them know that there's a great opportunity for him, and particularly for our STEM fields. We know that from this fall, there was a record number of students that entered college. And when we look at that record number, we do break down that information to see which areas did they go to. And then also, how does that impact us here at the University at Buffalo? So we do work on that information as well. As we are designing our program, some of the things that I ask our staff to think about is, one is, do we have an integrated approach here? And with that integrated approach, that means not only having folks from the admissions office go out and recruit students, but also other people on our campus and in our community that believe in what we're trying to do with our STEM environments. And so that integrated approach also involves how we evaluate applications for admissions. If we're going to put such a heavy weight on test scores, then we also need to make sure that we target the right populations when we put a heavy weight on test scores, so we can find students that have those type of test scores. In the STEM fields, and with our test scores, particularly in math and in science, when you break down the ACT, we do see there's a gap there with our diversity groups between our white students and our African American and Hispanic students. Our Asian students, usually there's no gap, usually sometimes higher scores in those areas. But we need to think about our targeted recruitment activities that we do. We ask our faculty to get engaged. Many universities have involved faculty in recruitment because that one-on-one attention with students, particularly when you're trying to diversify your class, a faculty member calling you, it's very important to that student, to that family, because they feel there's someone there that student can rely on. And some students can transition into college without that support, but there are other students, particularly going to the STEM fields, that know that the numbers are lower for their group, and will someone pay attention to them and give them the attention that they need. We talk about peer support, and many of you may be involved with tutoring programs and helping students transition to college, and not just transition to college, but transition into that major. So if they're coming into your department and you want students to stay in that department and graduate with you, and these are your friends that you'll, of course we hear, right, you'll make for life, and as you make these friends for life, you will call on these friends. I wish I was in President Obama's class when he graduated for Harvard. Who knows where I would be, you know? But we appreciate that because this is how we make our friends, and we need that diversity in our class to show that we can also work with different people, regardless of which race you belong to. We talk about the enriched experiences on campuses when we're trying to diversify the STEM areas. What will our students face when they come here? Will they have an opportunity to do research? And is that something available to them? What summer programs will they come into? And then two other things I want to mention. One is about the expectations that we have on students. I think students going into any major, we need to place high expectations on them. But when we place those high expectations on students, we have to take in consideration how rigorous of an academic curriculum did they come from. And if they didn't come from that rigorous curriculum, then perhaps we should not admit them into our institution into those majors. I've worked at other institutions where we've denied a student admissions, very bright student, wanted to go into engineering, and we said, yes, you can go into engineering, but not from this environment. You should go into engineering from another environment. And making sure that students are what we call are placed correctly in their colleges, and we have to make tough decisions there. I've never admitted a student just for a number when it comes to race and ethnicity. I admit for numbers when it comes to our overall admissions goals that we're trying to reach. And we pass that philosophy on to our admissions evaluators. We tell them admit to make sure that student has a chance of succeeding. So if we admit them in that program, they have a chance of staying. And finally, there's the bridging the gap to the next level, when we're bridging students coming from high school into college, particularly students that were from diverse backgrounds that we're trying to encourage to come to our institution. And so if we have summer programs available to them, tutoring programs available to them, the mentoring programs, we would like these students to come into our area, but we'll find a way to make it a transition. Some of us have parents that had experience in college. Some of us did not, and some of us come from very low-income families where college is not always talked about in your home. But for those students, and we admit them to this environment, either through our summer programs, or we admit them to a special program in the fall, or through our honors program, finding ways to connect them to the institution, keep them connected, because our success for growing diversity in STEM is to make sure the students we bring in stay in those fields and they graduate. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Lee. Ed, have you got any comments you'd like to make as a follow-up?
So a quick one, which is going to seem a bit bizarre. You and I spent an hour this morning with Brian McPherson looking at sustainability on campus, and it was one of the most impressive things I've seen, right? And sustainability is integrated, it appears, maybe Brian's just a very good con man, but to me it appeared to be integrated in all aspects of campus life, all right? It's something that people think about all over, in the dormitories, in the food services. It's not in some academic program or some special environmental dorm or something like that, all right? And remember, I'm coming from a field that does worse about diversity than almost any other field, so I skate on thin ice, but it seems to me that the same has to be true for diversity. It has to be part of what you do in every aspect of what you do, as opposed to this little thing that you do on Thursdays. Okay, and that to me is what you were describing. It has to be part and parcel of the mission of the place and something that everybody embraces as part of their job and as part of what makes it a stronger institution and what makes the field stronger. And for computer science and engineering fields, again, I think there's a real easy argument to make that a more diverse workforce produces a better outcome, right? Because each of us brings our own perspective, our own baggage, our own point of view to the creative process of design. And that's what engineering really is about. It's about creative design. It's highly creative. And if you have only part of the population involved in that, then there are perspectives you're not considering and alternatives you're not considering and even aspects of the problem that don't occur to you. So the selfish reason for wanting diversity in an engineering field, probably any other field, is you get a better product at the end because more perspectives have been considered.
Thanks, Ed. Moving along to Sarah Bay Chen. Sarah is going to talk to us about how to think outside of the traditional STEM box and how STEM fields intersect with the arts and humanities. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much. And I'm really very privileged to be here this afternoon. But I want to start by challenging a little bit this idea of a STEM box. Because it presumes for the moment that the arts and the sciences, particularly the technological sciences, are somehow mutually exclusive domains, as if the sciences were not creative and the arts were not rigorous. And in fact, as many of us in this room know and have experienced, the sciences are highly creative endeavors. And the arts, maybe some of you have experienced as well, are highly rigorous in their way. And in fact, what we are seeing right now, I think in a shift as we move further into the 21st century, is in fact a return that is many centuries, even millennial old, which is not a division between the arts and sciences, but a unification of those two things. And they're coming back together in really synergistic and exciting and interesting ways. One of the things that we've been developing on campus, my colleagues and I, is the Techne Institute for Arts and Emerging Technologies. And this is not an initiative to create anything. It's not an initiative to start anything. It's an initiative entirely to bring attention to what is already happening throughout this campus, which is to recognize the creativity and the work and design, among other things, that are already happening in our science fields, and also to recognize the tremendous infiltration and engagement with technology, new media, and other scientific research and discovery that is happening within the arts. And I think that recognizing these kinds of collaborations across the university and these synergies is really critical to expanding the diversity, particularly in the STEM fields, but really in any field. Because all of us engage from a different place. All of us come to the university and to our own passions from a unique perspective. Some students we can reach through the arts. Some students we can reach through the sciences. But many more students we can reach by engaging these two things together to broaden the field and to broaden our perspective. And I'll conclude with just a brief example. One of the things that Techne initiated this summer with colleagues in electrical engineering, in computer science at Canisius College, in education, in theater and dance, in media study, and in visual studies, was what we called the ARTY workshop, which is Art, Robotics, and Technology for Youth. And the idea with this workshop was to create an environment where students who might be engaged more by the arts or by computers could come together to do and create innovative work, learn beginning programming. This was targeted for 9 to 12-year-olds to come and build their own robots and then make art projects with them this summer. And what we found is that some of the students loved the art part, and some of the students hated the art part. And some of the students loved the robot building, and some of the students wanted the art part. But by going through this process, we found that everybody found something that they could connect to. And we had guest artists come and visit. We had someone come and demonstrate his robotic cello. We had another, one of my colleagues in theater come and demonstrate these wireless projectors that she's making in order to do self-sustaining wireless site-specific lighting installations. Right, highly engaged. And the students were able to see over the course of this workshop how these different things might be realized in different contexts, and to excite their imaginations in multiple ways, building, programming, as well as, and all within an art context. And so as we think further about diversity in this context, I really want to encourage us not just to sort of think ahead, but also to think historically, to look back at the rich history of the arts and sciences working together so that we can engage the maximum. Because if there's really three things that the university throughout the fields, humanities and social sciences as well, are engaged with, it's investigation, it's asking the interesting questions, it's discovery, it's finding the relevant and compelling answers, and then finally it's expression. It's sharing that knowledge more broadly. And all fields are more successful when we do this in concert with one another.
Thank you, Sarah. Ed, would you like to make any comment?
So Julio Atino, who's the extremely good chemical engineer, who's the Dean of Engineering at Northwestern University,
Right.
has a great little spiel he gives on the need to use both sides of your brain, the left and the right. And his example has to do with the discovery of the fact that the moon was a sphere and had craters, right? And there were two groups that had telescopes at the time, right? And the one that figured out what was going on the moon was the one that was in Italy, because the people standing behind that telescope had been immersed in the artistic culture of Italy. They understood 3D perspective, all right? And so looking through that telescope, they saw something completely different than the scientists saw, the pure scientists saw looking through the same telescope.
Interesting.
All right?
Interesting.
So I think that's a
good message, isn't it?
That's the pitch. There's a good lesson in that.
There absolutely
One other
is.
comment I'd make is we have, for 15 or 16 years now, a wonderful digital animation curriculum at the University of Washington that has equal numbers of students from computer science and art and music. And one of the great things about this is that the students surprisingly do not fulfill their stereotypical roles. You might think that the music students become the music team and the art students become the art team and the computer science students run the server farm. But in fact, there's a remarkable amount of sort of cross-fertilization and cross-choices that are made. And the result of this is that these students can go off and work at a Pixar where the technical directors, that is the computer folks, actually have to be able to talk to the animators.
Interesting. Very good. Thanks, Ed. Amy Bazance, would you please talk to us about your experience mentoring women students in STEM fields?
Okay. So in preparation for this panel, I said to two different groups I was working with last week, I have to go sit on a panel to talk about mentoring women students, and both groups said exactly the same thing back to me, which is, why is it different than mentoring any student? And that made me stop and think about if I thought it was different or not. And I think in the end that mentoring any student is different than mentoring any other student. And that the biggest thing that I can say in terms of student mentorship, and I should say that my perspective as a professor is primarily in the one-on-one mentoring of graduate students, and I'll speak a little bit about undergraduate mentoring in a minute, but in terms of mentoring graduate students through the very challenging process of identifying independent research, carrying it out, having the self-confidence to carry it out, and then taking that to the next step of finding a place in the world where they can continue to do that, is that for any particular student, you have to understand where they're coming from, what they can do, and where they want to go. And there is no one answer to that. In fact, the other thing they said to me is, well, you're canceling meetings with two of your women students to come and sit on the panel. So one
that's
thing you
wrong.
could say is not to do that. But in my rest of my Monday, I have half-hour meetings every half hour with all of my PhD students. And today, I have one student who is, I guess I shouldn't tell too many stories about current students, but I have one student who is in his home country potentially meeting a spouse. We don't know what's going to happen with that. I have another student who's wrapping up data collection. She needs to decide between an industry position and not an academic position, and some of that's based on some family pressure she's getting about how she's going to make that decision. I have other students who are very early in the process and don't know what direction they're taking, and every half hour I have to switch gears to remember what all of these different students need in terms of what the next steps are in their process. So, and again, I mean, whether or not that means that I talk to women students different than men students, or students, I currently do not have any students of color. I have a student who's Native American, but in any event, whatever the diversity component of that group is, there are so many inter-student differences, I'm not sure what swamps what. Okay?
Right.
So I think that is a critical thing to understand. From sort of the chair's perspective, or as someone, I served for many years as the undergraduate director in our department, another piece of diversity in terms of STEM that I worry about is not the pipeline from K to 12 into college, but I worry about the pipeline from bachelor's degree into master's and PhD. And I particularly worry about that in engineering because I believe less than 25% of engineering the PhDs go to people who were born in the United States. So we have a diversity issue in our own country in terms of educating students who are coming out of our own K to 12 and college systems. And I think that something that we as engineering faculty have failed to focus on, we focus a lot on getting our students internships and making sure they're ready for the job market at the end of a bachelor's degree, because a BS in engineering has currency in the job market. But what we need to be doing, and what I've tried to do and what I encourage our faculty to do, is to identify the students, the high-achieving undergraduates, and tell them that they are the people who should be getting PhDs. I don't think they're not hearing that message from anybody. And if they're not hearing it from us, they're not going to hear it from anybody. And that's true whether you're talking to women students, African-American students, or frankly, white men. It doesn't matter. They're not hearing it from anybody, and they need to be hearing it from us. That they should at least be going on to a research-based master's degree, which gives them the option eventually for a PhD. And speaking a little bit, I suppose, on the gender diversity issue, I think that it's a little bit less about what I do differently with men and women students than the fact that I exist at all. And I think that having women on the faculty means that students see that women can be on the faculty. Having a woman dean means that new assistant professors that we're making offers to think that might be a place they can succeed. We've went from one woman in my department 2 years ago, and now I'm one of 4, all right, which is, that's a big change. And so I think that merely existing can be helpful. Okay.
The existence proof.
I think being open about how you're managing it is helpful to people. I don't hide the fact that I have a daughter or a husband or a crazy dog. My students know that. My faculty knows that. I had a question in the coffee room this morning about, well, do you have like a housekeeper? And I was like, yes, I have. This is what I do. This is what I pay for. This is who comes after school. Being open about how it is that all gets done also provides any number of people with ideas about how they could be able to pursue that career path. So I think that that's, that can be important. So I think that's what I'm going to say.
Thanks, Ed.
All right.
Ed, would you like to make any follow-up comment?
So my comment about this is that it's important to realize, as you just heard, that while programs are important and policies are important, a whole lot of this is one person at a time. And as a faculty member, as anyone in a senior position to somebody else, you have to recognize the extraordinary impact of reaching out to somebody, the extraordinary impact that can sometimes have much more than you ever imagine. And you can also imagine that there are a set of things that are not gender independent. For example, the feeling that maybe it's my problem and I can't do it may not be gender independent, right? So it may be that there are things that you can do or approaches you can take that disproportionately help or hinder certain parts of the population because of the context they bring with them. So I think all of us have latent biases and latent behaviors that we need to think about.
Indeed. Thank you, Ed. Tamara, would you like to talk to us about the Tech Savvy Initiative and observations about the climate of support and encouragement for diverse STEM professionals outside of academia?
I would love to, and I'm going to try to do it in 5 minutes.
Woo!
So, try is the operative word. So it's, as many of you may know, I moved about a year ago to Connecticut. And so it's always nice to be back at UB. I am an alum. I am a former student of Dr. Passant's. And I also coordinate the Tech Savvy program here. So I feel like I've never left UB. Prior to becoming the leader for community engagement globally for Praxair a year or so ago, I spent 10 years in R&D and safety and engineering, and then before that I spent 10 years in a medical device career. And so when I think about the 20 years that have passed since I graduated from undergrad, I think about the challenges, but I also think about the growth of the problems, how the world is just so phenomenally different. And those problems are what all of us engineers like to solve. Problem solving is what I say engineers do. And so when I think about industry and what we need, industry needs problem solvers. And when I think of those problem solvers, I think about not just the STEM careers, but STEM skills in society. You've heard about the talent, and what I see is a lot of untapped talent in America, and I believe that increasing representation of underrepresented folks is the right thing to do. But because I sit in industry, let me also try to make that business case for diversity. So I work in sustainability. Community engagement is in sustainability. And we talk a lot about the need for a talented workforce. I look at sustainability as being able to be there for the long term. And so that means for us, how do we stay competitive? How do we increase value to our shareholders and our employees and our customers? And how do we win the war for solving those problems? And the answer is diversity. We know that teams that are diverse outperform sort of the A team. We also know that in certain sectors that having diverse teams, having people who have lots of different experiences, contributes to economic success for those companies, the economic indicators. And so diversity should always, I think, be seen as an asset. When we look at fields where there are 25% of women graduating in engineering or less, and in many fields, of course, the percentage of African Americans is much lower, we see that there is a pipeline problem. And so if we're not getting those folks in industry, if they're not graduating from college, if they're not entering the fields, if they're not coming there from high school, if they don't see themselves in those fields in middle school, that is a problem. And that's really what Tech Savvy solves. So about 9 years ago, the AUW, the American Association of University Women, Buffalo branch, founded this program. I helped to lead that effort, and Praxair was a big sponsor of that. Since in the last 8 years of the program, the last 8 years of the program, we've been right here at the University at Buffalo, a major partner in the effort. And many people know about our middle school flagship program. 3 real goals. First, so that you can see the role models that Ann talked about. One of my members says if girls can't be it, they can't see it. And I think that that's true for everyone. Eliminating the STEM applications, so really giving students the opportunity to see and to understand scientific principles, math principles, to start to put those to work. And then really to bridge that gap of preparedness, and I think that that's so important. A couple of the other things that we do in Tech Savvy that I think help from that 12-year-old girl going into a woman that's successful in whatever career choice that she plans to have is what we call our savvy skills. So negotiating, critical thinking skills. We start to develop those at the middle school age. And then we have a high school component that's fairly new, where we now have girls who've expressed interest and we shadow them. We allow them to shadow women in the fields to start helping them through the application process and to start thinking about what are the things I'm good at and how does that translate into a career. I like to say that we prepare the girls for the world, but I also think that an important part of what we all do is to prepare the world for girls. And so we have parent workshops, also teacher training, like spatial skills development, that really help to enrich the classroom for all students. I think that those things are critically important because they provide a catalyst for a supportive environment for diversity in the STEM fields. And so if you ask me if that's relevant, important to industry, of course I would say yes. The need, if we want to have talent in 2025 to solve the problems of 2025, we need that talent right now. We need to start developing that talent right now. The last thing I'll say is that when I grew up, so before college, I still can remember being a little child. And one of the things that I remember most fondly is that no one ever said that you can't do anything. And I think that that is so important, and that's something that I believe that we need to do for all of our children. I have to echo what Joe said earlier in terms of, we know that at middle school, students start to make that decision, and we want them to start thinking that they can see themselves in these fields. And they don't see themselves, regardless of whether they are very good at math and science, they start to choose. And we want to help them to choose so that we can all better solve those problems in 10 years, 15 years.
Thank you, Tamara. Ed, would you like to make any response and then maybe take 5 minutes to give your own thoughts at this point?
Let me do the
And then
5
we'll-
minutes instead.
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
So I was going to begin with some statistics, and I'm going to look at this from the point of view of computer science and engineering, where I sit, and I'm going to look mostly at gender diversity, because that's where I've focused mostly for a variety of reasons. And the numbers are shocking, so just to indicate that we've got a problem, here are a few data points. If you look at occupations, for example, this is who's working in the field, nearly 60% of people employed as professionals are women. Okay? 50% of biological scientists are women. 25% of computer scientists are women, and 15% of engineering occupations in addition to computer science. Okay? So it's just shockingly bad. Liesl and I represent sort of the worst of the world in terms of the environments we have. If you look at undergraduate degree recipients nationally, 60% women in biology and the biomedical sciences, 40% in the physical sciences, 15% in engineering and computer science nationwide. In fact, computer science, my understanding is slightly less than that now, 14 or 13%. Okay? And astonishingly, in 1985, computer science was at 35%, okay, which was twice the percentage of women in engineering. So as bad as engineering is, it's gotten better while computer science has gotten worse in the period of time since 1985. And now if you look at high school, all this is data from the National Center for Women in Information Technology, by the way. If you look at Intel Science and Engineering Fair participation, which is sort of the premier science contest for high school kids, in biochemistry, the participants are 60% women, 50% women in the environmental sciences, 30% in physics and in engineering, and 20% in computer science. The only good news is that's up from 5% in 2001. That's the only non-completely grim statistic in this. So these are just utterly shocking numbers. And the next question is why it matters. And as I said before, it matters for a set of reasons. There's obviously the workforce reason. If there's more people in the salt mines, then more work gets done. And I guess that appeals to some people. It doesn't appeal a lot to me. There's the social equity reason, which as a bleeding heart liberal appeals to me some. That is, everyone should have the opportunity to participate in these careers. But to me, the one that really sells is the greedy reason, all right? So if you're just a heartless capitalist and you don't care about social equity or anything like that, the fact is you're going to get a better product out the end if you have a diverse workforce. And you've heard that from people up and down the panel. And that's the one I think we have the greatest hope of selling. And this is as true in a research group as it is in a company. Then the question is, what can we do? And here's the number one thing, and I have this discussion regularly with Microsoft and with Google, and I'll relate the Google discussion because a few months ago, Google contacted me and said, gee, you folks are doing great stuff in diversity. We'd like to give you some money to create some programs and ramp them up. And what I said was the number one thing you people can do is clean up your own act, right? So that means that what each of us can do is make our own environment welcoming and open and hospitable to all sorts of people. And Honestly, I'm concerned that the major companies of the world think that this diversity is entirely our problem in academia and in school and not their problem. And if they just somehow throw money at us, the problem will get solved. All right? I mean, certainly there are many issues with the climate in computer science that fails to attract a diverse population, but one of them is the reputation that the field has. Right? And it's partly the Dilbert sitting in a cubicle reputation, which certainly was true at one point, but is not, I think, generally true today. The fact is that at least the software industry is highly collaborative and highly interactive, and people report that they spend only about a quarter of their time actually writing code, and the rest of the time is spent working with other people. Who'd have thought it, right? But it's also that these companies have a reputation for making technical decisions by having people scream at one another, right? And that's not an environment that people find equally appealing, right? Some people love that. Some people don't like it so much. And again, this is true for academia. We all have sort of latent biases in how we approach subjects. The best current thing for you to read is, how many folks saw the cover piece in the New York Times business section this Sunday on the Harvard Business School? Did anyone read this? This is just a wonderful, wonderful article, and everyone should go read this, right? You get 10 free reads on the web, even if you're not a subscriber, right? So this is a very long article describing a set of changes in the Harvard Business School just over the past 3 or 4 years that have had a remarkable effect on equalizing the performance of women in the program, right? It turns out that many of the men in the Harvard Business School are from, many people in HBS have had careers before they go to B school. They don't go there right after undergraduate. And many of them, particularly many of the men, have been in careers that select for people who are aggressive stand-up screamer types, okay? And this approach to teaching, in which you walk around the room and randomly and by surprise call on people and berate them if they don't give a good answer, favors those sorts of people and discriminates against people who don't have that sort of background. Just as an example, so one of the things they did that I thought was remarkable was to assign stenographers to the classrooms who would remember who said what. Okay, so that at the end of the semester, the instructor would actually have a record of who had contributed, rather than relying on his memory, and it was almost always a he. All right? I found the same thing when I've taught online courses or even classroom courses in which the student discussion is recorded on the web in blogs or wikis, right? And you go back at the end of the quarter and you see who has actually made substantive contributions that have changed the direction of the discussion, as opposed to just contributing yap. And it's also often not who you thought it was. Right? So please read this New York Times article. It's a great read, and it's a place that has really changed its behavior over the past just several years. So one thing that we've tried to do in computer science in my university is to have a really welcoming introductory course. And here's an interesting statistic, and then I'll give you some reasons for why this matters, why it's important. At the University of Washington, people apply to majors at the end of their freshman year or earlier in their sophomore year, right? And the majors are enrollment controlled, so we take 200 students a year, so you have to apply to the major, and we're oversubscribed, right? So you have to think of people coming in and fulfilling prerequisites and then applying to majors. Of the women in our, and we ask the students in our introductory course to respond to the following question: I intend to major in computer science or computer engineering. And it's from strongly agree, weakly agree, no clue, weakly disagree, or strongly disagree, okay? And 60% of the women who become our majors are in the bottom 3 categories. Right? It's because of lack of exposure or preconceived notions or something like that. They took the intro course with no notion that they might become a computer science major, right? And this is not the class as a whole. This is the women who actually become our majors, right? And that number is only, I believe, 30% for men, right? So the men come in with an idea of what they're going to do, and then they do it. For the women, they don't, right? So having these attraction waters and instructors, we use exclusively undergraduate teaching assistants in that course, and 45% of them are women, not because we select for that, but because that's who volunteers. Finally, and you heard a lot about this from Joe and others, participate in outreach activities that are systemic and sustained and counter the stereotypes. And Joe talked about engagement with teachers, and that's important. Again, we have lots of programs for high school and middle school women and students in general, but we do some programs for teachers that are really valuable because they often have no notion of what computer science is like either, and that it's a good career for everybody. Here's an example of something almost silly that we do that's had an amazing positive effect. We ask all of our new majors every year to nominate their most influential high school teacher. And everyone here who's you're all good students, those of you who are still students, you had some high school teacher who changed your perception of what you could do and what you could be. Right? For me, it was my Latin teacher. It's often not a teacher in your major. And then we invite those teachers and their partners and the students who nominated them in for a dinner. And it turns out that high school teachers get so few positive reinforcements that they're eternally grateful in return for a dinner and a tote bag and the chance to reacquaint themselves with someone who was their favorite teacher, favorite student a few years before. And we are differentially browning up the high school teachers who send us women students because the women students are differentially far more likely to take the trouble to nominate somebody. Okay? I talked about driving our fields into K-12, which is, I think, really important. The fact is that students come out of K-12 with a pretty good feeling for biology and chemistry and maybe physics and no feeling at all for engineering or computer science, and I think that's important. And finally, I've said this before, there's no silver bullet. All right? A lot of this is one person at a time, just working at it and chipping away at it. If there were a silver bullet, it would be great. We could just do it and we'd be done with the problem. I know in computer science, we've been working relentlessly on this issue for more than a decade, and the progress has been, unfortunately, pretty dismal, but that just means we have to work longer and harder at it.
Thank you very much, Ed. I'd like to give a round of applause for the panel at this point, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So it's going to take all my willpower to not throw all my questions at the panel, but I'm going to hold to the program and ask for your questions. Did anybody want to start off with something for the panel? There we are. Thank you very much.
I know this is against the rule at conferences I go to where the graduate students and postdocs get the first question, but...
We don't have that rule. Go ahead.
So I'm going to direct a question to Professor Bezanson. I think your point was spot on, that for us to make an impact, a difference, it really is this one-on-one interaction we're going to have. And it doesn't matter whether it's in kindergarten or whether it's as a doctoral student. And I would ask of those of you who are within the university, and even what happens at the University of Washington, what is the institution doing one-on-one with their faculty to give them workshops on how to be a good mentor? Because we get our PhDs, but no one has ever told us how to interact one-on-one with an individual.
You want me to comment on that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so as a department chair, I guess I'll say, and maybe Satish knows something different, or Liesl, but I don't know of anything I can send a new faculty member to get training on mentoring PhD students. I can say that in my department, and I've said this for years, we have been extremely fortunate to have very responsible senior faculty who take the mentorship of PhD students and master's students seriously and do not treat students in a cavalier manner. And that is a culture that I came through the tenure process with and am trying my best to continue to uphold as I'm talking to all the new faculty we're hiring and as we try to model appropriate co-mentorship situations with, between a senior faculty member and a new faculty member with a PhD student, or in our advisement of new faculty about how to pick up and deal with new PhD students. But that, again, is a very one-off kind of solution, and I think that there's a departmental culture that has been very positive in the program that I am now fortunate to be chair of, okay? So we don't have a culture of it being problematic. We do have one where we work very hard with our PhD students, and I think we have good success. I should also say that I mentor a lot of women PhD students, but so do my colleagues. We are unusual in engineering. Last year when I counted, we were 40% women PhDs. Okay, and it's not just me advising them, all right, so that's across the board in my department, but I don't know of anything systematic. But is there? Yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
offer a slightly a small challenge to your statement about the one-on-one nature of mentoring, which is I do mentor women differently, and here's why. There's a lot of behavioral data about how women behave differently from men, and I feel that if women students are made aware of those data, they are more likely to be able to see themselves in the data and respond accordingly. So we know, for example, that women are much less likely to negotiate on salary or other terms of employment. And so when women come to me and say, well, I'm going to apply for a job, and what should I do? And the number one thing I say to them is, if they offer you a job, for God's sake, don't say yes until you've come back and talked to me about how you're going to negotiate. So I do offer different mentoring to women. And this is it's a well-documented phenomenon that if somebody offers a woman a job, she thinks, thank God somebody wants me. Somebody offers a man a job and he thinks, well, of course they want me, I should ask for more money immediately. It's a very well-documented phenomenon, and I feel that if I don't talk about it with women students, they won't see themselves in the data and respond. The other big one in academia is that it's known that women and underrepresented minorities are much less likely than their male peers to appear as first author or last author on a paper. Well, how do you deal with that? One way you deal with it is by being proactive about starting the draft of the paper the minute the data starts coming in. Like, don't sit back and think, well, I'll just wait till it's all complete and I've got all my graphs ready, and then don't do that. Start the draft of the paper, because that gives you ownership on the paper and the data set and so on and so on. But I think if we don't bring those observations that are known up to women and underrepresented minorities, that doesn't give them the opportunity to react accordingly and maybe adjust their behaviours just a teeny bit to change the dynamic, I would say. Another question from the audience. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that having access to technology at a younger age is essential to foster interest in computer science for children. But for those living under the poverty level, it's really difficult sometimes to have access to a computer to toy around with, to play around with, and to really get to know. So I was wondering if there's anything being done to help provide access to computers and other technologies for those?
I'll hand that question to Joe.
So thanks to one of the students in my class for asking that question. The so-called digital divide is the term that's out there about access to high-speed internet in the home and its relation to family income. I've been, and a lot of our thinking in the ISEP program was trying to engage parents and trying to engage students to deal with that particular issue until students themselves convinced me that there was a path forward on this. And I think it's too much that we think that high-speed internet access means a box on a table or a high-end laptop with a Wi-Fi or high-speed internet in the home. A huge fraction of parents in Buffalo and their children have smartphones. They have access to the internet, and that's how they access the internet. And so with help from computer science PhD student last year, a PhD student in our department, Levon Rodolph, we began to institute a change in the way computer science teachers at our local engineering high school approach the problem. So she changed her class to teach programming for apps for these devices. with the idea that we might use that as a means to stimulate interest and have students to see their cell phone as a pretty sophisticated computer. I'm old enough to know that my cell phone has more power than Yale's computer when I was in college. So it's just, I think that's one way to think about that access, that we are all walking around with sophisticated computers, and that there's ways to engage, especially if you're thinking about ways to engage parents and students to use social media to connect more. I mean, my old-fashioned thinking was, I'm married to a librarian, and so I thought, well, use the public libraries as the best way to get access. But that still requires those families to go to the public libraries. And so I think we need to rethink about what devices we actually are all carrying around, and how we get access through those devices.
If I could just
Go
add
ahead, Sarah.
one more thing to what Joe is talking about. I mean, it's not just in this country, but globally, smartphone use is exponentially outpacing other modes of internet access. So when we talk about who's on these devices and what computing even means, increasingly we're talking in mobile context. And one of the things that's been done here in Buffalo, but in many arts communities, is the creation of maker fairs, which are these, and hacktivists and hackathons and various kinds of artists and technologists coming together, but creating community access in community centers, libraries, sometimes in museums. The Foundry here in Buffalo is a really key example. And it's precisely those ideas of breaking open the little plastic and metal boxes that we all carry around. Not just literally opening them up, although that's part of it, but also conceptually opening them up. Helping students and of all ages understand that they don't just have to be consumers and recipients of this kind of technology, but can take an active role in creating and shaping it. And this is particularly important in the context of gender in computer science, because we know that many more women participate as consumers of social media, but are profoundly underrepresented in open source development and any kind of new creative, particularly when we get into open source and startup communities, right? Then, their participation plummets to, I think, single digits.
Yeah, 5%.
Last time I checked. So it's precisely those kinds of intersections of art and technology in public space and making that accessible in communities that can begin to open up the potential for something that, to address the digital divide, many people already have access to and familiarity with.
Here. There's someone over here.
I would like to know what approaches could be taken to increase students' interest in engineering in high school. Because I know someone said that it was just biology, chemistry, and physics. And also, is it more about the skills we use in engineering versus the actual information, which is over all the courses usually?
Go for it, Amy.
So I've had a little bit, I've tried to think about this a little bit over the years as we've looked at recruiting into IE and other engineering fields, and also participating as a judge or some other observers in high school level engineering initiatives like Project Lead the Way, which is a local initiative in high schools here that puts students in some pre-engineering classes. And I think one of the biggest things that we need a TV show. Okay, so everybody else gets a TV show or a movie. We had a cool movie, but it's old now. The Apollo 13 was a good engineering.
Well, and Star Trek was good.
Yeah, okay. So, so I think in all seriousness, one of the problems has been that engineering is part of the whatever used to be like industrial arts or technology or whatever that part of high school and middle school is. Engineering isn't part of the science and math curriculum. But engineering is science and math. It's rather than a sort of a technology add-on. Okay, so I think that one thing is that, and I am not well versed enough in, and perhaps Joe has more knowledge of how engineering fits into the new Common Core. I wonder if it even does in the science and math curriculums at high school. But as long as engineering is not integrated into chemistry, physics, and calculus, I don't think we're going to see the kind of impact at the high school level we would like to, because the students who are high achieving math and science students who are going to be successful in engineering are not taking the technology courses necessarily in high school. So that's one issue. I think that's a big part of it, that students don't see math and science as part of engineering. They see engineering as that other thing that maybe their high school has that other program in that some of the guys are participating in.
Ed's also going to make a follow-up comment there.
So I actually have a lot of optimism about the impact that the maker movement may have. You just heard that referred to, right? We if you go back when I was a boy, you didn't have the level of integration, so it was possible to take things apart and put them together and build things. And we've been through a 20-year period in which the level of integration of devices and the level of sophistication was so high that you couldn't touch them, you couldn't take them apart, you couldn't put them together, you couldn't build them, right? And all you could do was use them, right? And what the maker movement, I think, is going to do, in addition to its possible positive impact on diversity, is to create a new generation of people who once again realize that they can build cool things. Right? And they can build cool things on the cheap, because these are places that you just go and you use very sophisticated tools like 3D printers, for example, extremely inexpensively. And so I'm very optimistic about the impact this is going to have over the next 10 years in creating a generation of kids who realize that they can produce cool things. I think one of the problems we've had in computer science is that going back 20 or 30 years, in a first course, you could produce things that your friends would say, wow, how did you do that? And now, for the past 20 years, all you could produce in an intro course is something that was dramatically inferior to what your friend had on his or her game console or phone, all right? So there was kind of no appeal. And again, we're getting back in the realm where due to improvements in tools and the ease of producing smartphone apps and things like that, you can produce something that's kind of cool, and that's what people like. They like to do things that are cool. So I think that the maker movement are going to have pretty significant impact. I'm really optimistic about this.
I agree. Did you want to say something, Lee?
Yes, I do actually. And thanks for bringing that question to the table regarding how we can increase engineering in high schools and middle schools. I think what we need really is we need more interaction with our high schools, and not just going to the school. We know that in our high schools here, the student-to-counselor ratio is about 400 students to a counselor. And at some schools where it's 30 students to one counselor, they have more opportunities to explore. And it feels as if we've taken away the exploration opportunities for students in our public schools. So if we had a pilot program here, and as Tamara Brown mentioned earlier about getting in front of middle school students and really talking about that intro to computer science course, but not their first year in college, but somewhere in your freshman year in high school, where students are thinking about math and science and engineering, and this is something that they can actually do. And so as an institution, we have an opportunity to identify a school, adopt that school, and try a pilot program. As we know, there's several opportunities throughout from Washington where they have that new science center where people are exploring and trying different approaches to see what works in one school district or what works in one school and in one community or for one group. So while we can continue to go out and talk about it, if we're not there in front of those students and giving them a sustained time of hours of talking about engineering at the intro part of it, then it will be hard to increase that. But I would hope that would be something we would be interested in trying.
Go, Ed.
One is that FIRST Robotics has had a very positive impact in lots of areas. And an important aspect of FIRST Robotics is the teamwork and teams supporting other teams. The fact that it's a community of people working together as much as it is a competition. A second comment, and this is pretty obvious, but I think kids come out of the womb as natural explorers. And somehow over the course of their education, we manage to beat that out of them, right? So turning education back into inquiry and discovery is really important. And it's easy to blame K-12 for that, but I think at the college level, our introductory courses in the sciences and engineering, they stink, and computer science is certainly as bad as any, right? And I had a discussion with John Hennessy, an old friend who's the president of Stanford, a year after he became the president of Stanford. So that's almost a decade ago. And he mentioned three things that surprised him. And he'd been provost for a few years, but in his first year as president. And the most interesting thing to me was that he said that the 15% of students who come to Stanford seeking a great technical education get it, and they also get a reasonable grounding in the humanities. And the 85% of students who come to Stanford technophobic are allowed to leave in exactly that state. And it's easy to blame them or to blame their faculty, but the truth is that the fault is ours, because our introductory courses don't teach the mode of thought of the field. They don't teach anything to you that would be useful in your life. Rather, what they do is they're either a first course for the major or a weed-out course. All right? Here's an engineering example. I had a discussion many years ago with Alan Bromley, who at that point was the Dean of Engineering at Yale and had previously been Nixon's science advisor. So that tells you how long ago this had to be. And Bromley had a PhD in physics, but a bachelor's degree in engineering. And what he said was, as presidential science advisor, his bachelor's training in engineering was infinitely more valuable to him than his PhD training in physics and his faculty position previously as a physicist, because it taught him a couple of things. It taught him order of magnitude estimation, and it taught him to apply real-world knowledge to crap detecting what people told him. Okay? So, for example, you have to believe that there's some introductory engineering course that we should all be teaching, but none of us are, and that people would be beating down the course to take, not because it's a requirement, because it's something about how we practice engineering that's valuable to everybody. And we just don't do it. So I think, and again, you can blame the AP exams. They're lousy, but what are the AP exams? They're mirror images of our introductory courses, which are terrible.
And on that not very cheerful note, we need to wrap up this event. As the moderator of this panel, I have the luxury of making some final comments, and what strikes me and resonates with me from the discussion today is that we somehow have failed to convey to the broader public how critical creativity is to engineering. And so exactly where Sarah is driving us with the Techne Conference and this intersection of art and media studies and theatre and engineering and science is exactly where all the excitement is for technology going forward. It is the intersection of creativity and hardcore building stuff in the lab that is going to take us into the future, and somehow we fail to convey that to students that are in our pipeline, our middle school, our elementary, middle school and high school students that are in the pipeline. I am always startled by how many students are attracted to degree programs that I view as being highly analytical. Yes, that resonates with their skills in mathematics and science and so on, but completely lacking in creativity. Engineering, physics, chemistry, math and so on are really the gateways to truly creative careers. And so if you do like to build things and you like to be creative and you have that analytical mind, really that's where you should be. And that's what the country needs, because that's what's going to lead us forward into the next decade, the next millennia. I would like to take a moment to thank all our speakers for coming, and then to remind you also that Dr. Lazowska's keynote address tomorrow is at 3:30 in the Student Union Theatre. The title is Big Data, an Enormous Opportunity. So we won't be talking about STEM opportunities for women and underrepresented minorities, but rather about the opportunities for big data to change our lives tomorrow. We're expecting a large crowd, so please come early to get a seat. Thanks again for coming today. Please, we've got refreshments at the back. We invite you to stay and discuss the ideas that have come out of the discussion. Commune with your fellow UB community and community members, and approach any of the speakers if you've got specific questions that you'd like to address. Thank you all for coming.